Jai Bhim and Namo Buddhaya to you all who are joining in today for our fourth session on a course on learning Buddhism, learning Dhamma with the study of the Jataka tales. And today we are going to go through some very important aspects of the Jataka tales. So I will begin with sharing my presentation with you all. So I titled today's presentation as multifunctionality and multidimensionality of the Jataka stories, because when we look at this great treasure of the Jataka, we cannot but be amused by the amount of functions they can do and kind of dimensions evolve out of the study of the Jataka tales. So we will be looking at various functionalities and the dimensions of the Jataka tales, and I subtitled it as "Wisdom is a Way of Life" because this is a wisdom literature, the Jataka tales, and they have so much of a potential to impart much needed wisdom for the humanity today. So let's go to the next slide as to what we are going to study in this session today. We are going to review briefly, not at length, what we have been doing in the last sessions. Then we will be looking at, the various modes of categorization of the Jataka tales. And why do we need the modes of classifications and categorizations? Because they yield the different functions and the different dimensions of the great treasure trove of the Jataka birth stories. This is, we are going to look briefly at the canonical classification in terms of the 2020 path. Then we have already seen the classification 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm going to briefly talk about the other sort of classification today, which are going to, help us to make sense of the Jataka tales. Interestingly, the classification 8, which is like how we can look at the Jataka tales from the Ambedkarite foundation of liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity, and democracy. And we will be giving a considerable time today to read Matanga, Jataka, as a kind of a dialectics between Buddhism and Brahmanism to show that, how this, there is a misconception that the Jataka tales are Brahmanized and, they have no Buddhist element, they are superstitious, but it's not like that. Narrative literature is always very creative and its function is very different from the normative literature. And we will be seeing through the study of Matanga Jataka as to how much it can, help us to understand the dialectical tension between Buddhism and Brahmanism, which is even persistent today in the country. So this is why we need to study the Jataka stories, particularly from the point of view of revival of Buddhism in India, because as we know that, the revival of Buddhism in India is getting stronger and stronger momentum every day. And but we do not see the study or the Jataka coming into focus as far as the Buddhist revival of Buddhism is concerned. And we have seen that Baba Ambedkar has underscored the theory of Jataka as the test of purification before you become the Buddha in the Buddha and his Dhammas. And we have also noted as to how Baba Ambedkar was exposed to the Jataka stories very early on in his Columbia days. But to begin with, to anchor why it is important to study the Jataka stories, besides other dimensions of the Tripitaka, is the very important quotation by Stephen Collins, about whom we have already read a bit. So he had remarked as to why we need to study the Jatakas. So he says, in the study of Hinduism, it would hardly be novel to insist on the fact that the narratives like Mahabharata, Ramayana, and other mythological stories, Puranas, are just as important as doctrinal and philosophical texts to our understanding of its intellectual history. So you know that often, more than the so-called philosophical and ideological or doctrinal treatises in Brahminical Hinduism, the narrative sort of literature, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the Puranas are invoked while in understanding the intellectual history. And it's also not only about intellectual history, but as late Professor Colin has said, as well as of its cultural and religious history more generally. In the study of Buddhism, however, this suggestion might still appear to be something new. Where last decade has seen a lot of scholarship emerging in the Western universities to study Jataka, to understand the intellectual history and the cultural and religious history. The domain is evolving, and there are lots of good books and papers which have been emerging, which I have been sharing in our group about how the exploration of the narrative thoughts in Buddhism, particularly Jataka tales, and so many stories, so many narratives are scattered throughout in the Buddhist canonical literature and also non-canonical literature. So this is what is the importance of studying the narrative or the stories in the Buddhist context. Of course, we know that the Buddha was a master storyteller. I'm not going to talk about his storytelling prowess in other parts of the Tripitaka, but if we look at the frame of the Jataka tales, every Jataka tales, is narrated by the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha. So he talks about the present, problem or event or whatever is the discussion between the monks, and then he relates to the story. He relates the story of the past, and he then bring the correspondence between the past and the present story, thus making the stories very dynamic. And with the Buddha as the narrator, we can see that there is a moral dimension to the Jataka stories, which all the way links up to the achievement of the Buddhahood itself. So we can look at the Buddha as the great teacher of the humanity, but we cannot also forget the dimension of his being as a storyteller, and he was a master storyteller, the kind of stories that he told. In the Buddhist history, you see a lot of great people have been the master storytellers, following the tradition of the Buddha himself. In Japan, there is, tradition in Jain Buddhism where the stories are told by the monks, and they are very interesting stories which connects with the audience. So the storytelling is the part of the Buddhist pedagogy since the Buddha. So to just push the discussion forward about some of the very interesting dimensions of the Jataka tales, because as I said that Jatakas are not just the stories, they have the pedagogical or dialogical aim to educate the people, and they are the intellectual achievements of the Buddhists, the language used in the Jataka tales, the kind of the literary style used in the Jataka tales is so amazing that we can understand that the Jatakas are not just for entertaining us. This is of course, entertaining literature. It's a slow reading, and we can learn a lot by that. We don't have to focus our brain to study the stories, compared to the logical or the analytical literature. So Charles Hallis is one of the pioneer of the Jataka studies, and he has coined a very important term called the moral creativity with regards to the Jataka tales. And it covers not just the ability of the Bodhisattva demonstrate in the five precepts, because in the Jataka tales is about five precepts, and there are a lot of references to the five precepts and the precepts in general, particularly the Sila. But also, as Professor Charles Alice will teach us, through enactment in narrative, a means of demonstrating great resourcefulness. The traditional word, the term for the great resourcefulness is the Upaya Kaushalya. And you will see this term coming into Jataka tales more often, and you should keep this term in mind, Upaya Kaushalya, as to how we can bring this moral creativity at play instead of just rattling the rules in our ears, or telling others to follow the precepts, as to how we can make the use of what is called the moral creativity. And ethical thinking need not be boring. Sarah Shaw, he has written one of the very interesting paper, Ethics and the Jatakas. and which is subtitled as "Can Narrative Support a Secular Ethical Code?" And the way she analyzes, proving the point that the Jatakas can become a support for the secular ethical code. And she also talks about her classroom experiences when she talks about the ethics, particularly Buddhist ethics, as to how it puts off people. Because the ethics, talking about the ethics is generally boring for the people. But when she raises certain questions and open-ended questions in the class and asks the students to, put forward their views, then she says that the ethical thinking is very creative. And the ethical thinking is of course creative because we face the ethical dilemma all the time in our lives. And therefore, if we engage with the Jataka tales per se, we can understand that the ethical thinking can be creative. And as we know from Professor Charles Halise, that the stories are not just about marking the difference, like painting the things in black, good or bad, or black or white. It is about making a difference as to how we can transform the world around us through our ethical thinking and ethical practices. So it is just not just the following of the precepts, as to how we can make a difference. And here his discussion on how the narratives can help us to realize the transformative potential. He has talked about the three ways. He talks about, I'm just going to read a few lines. Um, to that end, we will trace three different ways in which moral life is enabled by narrative. So the moral life is enabled by narrative. So he says that the Jatakas can enable us to live, to act morally, or to have the moral life. And he says that uh, And he says very interestingly here, to that end, we will trace three different ways in which moral life is enabled by narrative, particularly prefiguration. And what does he mean by prefiguration? The effect of narratives in enlarging an agent's moral origin. And then the second way, he says configuration, the power of narratives like the Jataka tells to expose the opaqueness of moral intention. So the intention is very important to know as to how a moral agent is
Whatever.
changing.
If you go upstairs,
And
yes.
the third is, of course, the refiguration, the healing and the transformating potential of narratives. So the stories Jataka tells and all, they have the healing and transformating potential of they can do it. I would like to request you to please mute your mics. So you see, there is also Sarah Shaw has interestingly brought a very interesting discussion on the mindfulness. She is, of course, the scholar of meditation and the Jatakas, a very unique scholar of her time. And she talks about how we can reconcile the Sati and Shila, the mindfulness. Mindfulness is a big thing in the Western world. It's brought in the medical department, as it were, in the psychological practices as well. And what is interesting here is that she talks about, how we can bring the Shila as, or the ethics in terms of the mindfulness of others. I'm not going to go into that. She talks about a very interesting concept of rumination, as to why, how psychologically we ruminate, just like the cow does the rumination, chewing again. So something happens, but in our minds, we ruminate it again and again. And, there the mindfulness of the present moment can help us to come to what is happening now instead of rumination. And there, of course, the intention matters. So, she goes into this very interesting concept, and I will share these papers in the group. So, there is a case that Sharashaw makes that the Jatakas can have enable that has enabling power to talk about, or make a difference in terms of the secular ethics or practice of secular ethics in the modern world today. Of course, when we talk about Baba Saheb Ambedkar and his teacher John Dewey, they talk about the reflective morality, the morality informed by the engagement. Very interesting concept. And of course, in Baba Sahib's scheme, he doesn't favor the rule-based, paradigms. He talks about the principles. And I think this way of looking at the things from these two perspectives is very helpful to us when we look at the Jataka tales. So this is what we have been doing in the last sessions. I'm just going to recap 6,500 gathas in the original Jataka, in the Khudak Nikai. And Anvay, please switch off your, please unmute your, please mute your mic, please. And later on, there are narrative prose which are written over the period of time, redacted time for the centuries. And then we have Pali Jataka Atta Katha is the collection of 550 Jataka stories. And there is another collection also, apocryphal Pali Jatakas called the Pannas Jataka in Burma. And they were sort of settled in the 5th century AD, 500 AD. The stories are popular in the Buddhist world and were the part of the popular Buddhism. Popular doesn't mean inferior Buddhism. Popular means that, it was a part of the intellectual tradition and also the part of the people's tradition, part of the rituals and the festivals as well. And in Sanskrit, we have the Jataka Malas, particularly Aryashuras and Haribhattas. And the birth stories were the part and parcel of the mass education in the Buddhist world. And this frame I'm going to not going to go into, but we have to bear in mind that there is a frame where the Buddha frames the Jataka, and it's very important for us to understand the narrative strategy of the Jataka stories. And the stories are the part and parcel of the Buddhist culture in even today, and the birth stories are classified in many ways. So just to go forward with a few classification. There is a canonical classification of the Jataka tales, which talks about, the classification based on the verses, and there are 22 Nipats. And in the modern times, we have seen two classification by Stephen Collins and Naomi Appleton, amazing scholars of the Jatakas. We can classify the extant 550 Jataka stories based on our needs to understand certain underlying themes. For example, certain underlying dimensions and different functions that we can derive from the rearrangement of the Jataka tales, reclassification, reconfiguration, as it were. And one of the ways to classify is to create story clusters. It has been done very well by the team led by Naomi Appleton. You can visit this website anytime, and you can play with very different teams and find out very different classification of the Jataka, the various story clusters. And for example, by audience, we can look at the Jataka stories, for it 480 stories when they were studied, where 80% of them are addressed to the bhikshus and 20% are addressed to the non-monastic. So, even if they were the popular stories, they were very intellectually stimulating stories, as it were. And we have seen this. I'm not going to go into that because we have seen this in the previous sessions, the classification by Stephen Collins, and very helpful classification. And we have seen different various stories in this various classification. Then we have seen Naomi Appleton's, classification as well, and she has classified the story like that. So I'm not going to go much into that. There's a very interesting sort of a classification which has come up, studied by Sarah Shaw, crossing to the farthest shore, Paramita, or Paragu, the person who crosses it. And why I found it interesting because this is how Baba Ambedkar referred to Jataka when he was studying the ancient commerce, that the Jatakas have the complete narrative or description of how the sea voyages were carried away, and how in some of the Jatakas the Buddha himself was leading the captain of the ship. So we know that this theme of Dhamma as a boat is prevalent in the uh, Buddhist canonical literature. Buddha Dhamma as a raft, sometimes called Nava in Pali, Udumpa, and Kurda. It's a very small boat. And the person who is enlightened is, of course, one who has crossed over the flood, Tinna, and gone beyond Paragu. So, there are very interesting ocean Jatakas, I would say, which is classified by Sarasha. Very interesting sort of this thing. And there is a Mittavinda Jataka, Mahajanaka Jataka, very interesting Jataka, Mahajanak Jataka, where our hero crosses over and the ship is wrecked, and how he saves the lot of people from drowning, but nobody is saved, everybody dies, and how Mani Mekkalai, very famous sea goddess, she comes and rescues him. Very interesting sort of a Jataka story in Mahajanaka Jataka. Of course, Lotaka Jataka and Chatudwara Jataka, they talk about the ocean journey, and the motif is crossing the flood or crossing the ocean, the large expanse of the sansara, as it were. And as we have seen that the crossing the sansara is very Buddhist sort of theme. So There are Jatakas can be classified, and a lot of people have done this very interesting classification, sacrifice at various level, at the level of body, at the level of wealth, and the level of family, the child, children, and the wife. And they're very interesting sort of a genre if you look at it, the sacrifice at various level. And there is of course Dana Paramita, one level, then there's a Upa Paramita, and there's a Parama Paramita where a person sacrifices his life itself. So I think this is a very interesting classification. Then there is of course the classification of self-sacrifice for a tiny verse. And I think this is a very interesting paper by Shaw, Professor Shaw, where she talks about that there is a cluster of stories in which the Bodhisattva makes a sacrifice of flesh, family members, or wealth in exchange for single verse of a teaching. Bodhisattva sacrificing his body to attain the Dhamma body. So, it is not just the sacrifice, it's a sacrifice meant to attain the Dhamma body, the body of the Buddha himself. And, this story, she relates a very beautiful story from the Avadana Shatak, Surupa Avadana. And she talks about how Surupa is ready to sacrifice his family and himself to understand one gatha of the Dhamma. And the gatha is very interesting. It's in Dhammapada. Pemato jayati soko, pemato jayati bhayam, pemato vipamuttasa, kuto sokom, kuto bhayam. If one is freed from the attachment to the near and dear ones, there is no show, there is no sorrow, and there is no fear. So, in the Mahayana tradition, of course, the Bodhisattva will do anything to get even a tiny teaching of the Dhamma. And this is the third stage of the Bodhisattva path in Dash Bhumika Sutra. And we have seen how Baba Ambedkar has brought Dash Bhumika and Jataka stories together to talk about how the Bodhisattva's path towards the Buddhahood. So, what is the message for us? The Dhamma is precious and hence worth the sacrifice. We should be humble in receiving the Dhamma. And, the commitment shows that we are committed to learn the Dhamma. So, this is what, shows that we should be ready to sacrifice to learn the Dhamma. So this is a very interesting classification. Then there is, of course, the classification of 10 paramitas. The last 10 jatakas, very voluminous jatakas, 600 pages. And these all jatakas are very beautiful. I have been reading these jatakas, and these are very beautiful jatakas. If you enter into the world of jatakas, particularly these 10 jatakas, there is no animal. The Buddha is not animal in any of these, except in one Bhuridatta Jataka, the Buddha is Naga. The Naga priest. A very interesting, beautiful Jataka tale. And one of my favorites is, of course, Mahosada Jataka, which is about the wisdom. These all 10 corresponds with the 10 paramitas. And, I wish we had a longer time to talk about, read these Jatakas, particularly Mahosada Jataka, very beautiful Jataka. And, once you enter into the domain of Mahasudha Jataka, it's very difficult to come out. A lot of teaching, a lot of wisdom, a lot of intellectual puzzles, and, the imaginative power, even it verges at the level of the science fiction, because the Mahosat creates a kind of a tunnel, which is very interesting. It's also called the Ummaga Jataka. So I'm not going to go into that. We are going to touch some of the aspects of the Vesantara Jataka, which is a very anti-penultimate birth of our Bodhisattva. It's a very interesting Jataka. And this is one of the ways by which we can classify all the Jatakas 550 based on 10 paramitas. Sometimes they fit, sometimes they don't fit, but this can be done. So I would, come to the classification of our time, whether it is possible to classify the extant 550 Jatakas and, the other Jatakas in terms of the Ambedkarite perspective, particularly from the perspective of the justice. And we have seen in the first session itself that the Jataka we related, Nigrodha Miga Jataka, is about social justice. The Bodhisattva deer pushes forward for the justice for all. And that is the theme which is reflected in the Jatakas, all the Jatakas, because one of the aims of the Jataka is to, talk about the social justice itself. And of course, the liberty, the Jatakas talk about the freedom of the self and the freedom for others. That's particularly, Mahosad's, what is called the Atta, the legal cases. The Attas are used as the legal cases. There are, many legal cases in the Mahoshada Jataka. And in the Mahoshada Jataka, wait, please give me one moment. Sanjay Paikrao, can you please mute your mic, please? Because it distracts. So let's come to this thing. Where is okay? So is the screen visible to you? Sorry for this. Anway, can you please mute your mic? Okay, so the particularly the cases which are there in the in the Mahasudha Jataka legal cases where the Bodhisattva Mahashod gives very the judgments, and the judgments are very interesting. They itself can become the part of a very interesting study. And of course, the theme of the Jatakas is the foundation of the just society and dignity on humanity. We have seen the Losaka Jataka, which talks about the human dignity in terms of how the dignity of the individual is important. And also, of course, we can relate some of the Jatakas with the good governance that the king is taught the Dasa Dhamma. And I think there is a very interesting sort of an idea there. So we come to what we are going to read today, and Kane and Vishaka have volunteered to read the very beautiful Jataka. But before we read, I just wanted to briefly touch upon the dialectics of Jataka tales, particularly in relationship with Buddhism and Brahmanism, as to how the Jataka tales counter the Brahminical claims of superiority of class of people born in a particular group. And Matanga Jataka, based on this, it's a very interesting study. Matanga is an outcast and he's a bodhisattva, Matanga Bodhisattva. And it's a very beautiful story in the Jataka tales, And Justine talks about, very interesting ideas about asceticism and the Jataka tales in his PhD thesis, which is about, Buddhist values in the Pali Jatakas with particular reference to the theme of renunciation. Justin Meland, he has submitted his PhD for the Oxford University, and what he says is both ascetic and non-ascetic Brahmins are the focus of attacks in Jataka. And Bodhisattva born as a Chandala in Satadhamma Jataka, Chavaka Jataka, Amba Jataka, and Chitta Sambhutta Jataka. And Matanga subverts the Brahminical values, particularly the notion of purity, supremacy based on birth, and karma determinism. He offends the hierarchical society. We are going to see in a very morally creative way. This is a very interesting term as to how the asceticism offenses the established society. A very interesting thought of a term by Stephen Collins, but I'm not going to go into that. But offending the hierarchical society is very important that we need to offend the established hierarchical society. Then, of course, the mental hatred, that is the hallmark of the Brahminical system. How important it is to challenge the mental hatred. And also, of course, challenging the three Vedas, doctrine of three Vedas. And very interestingly, Matanga is in the society, but apart from the society. Very interesting term I'm using, used by Baba Ambedkar, part apart. And of course, the agency and responsibility. So there are very important dimensions to the Matanga Jataka, which we are going to read today and going to gloss over a lot of aspects of it. So it's a long story, how patience, but the reading of Jataka itself, as you're going to see, as to how important, how educative it can be. So let's request Ken and Vishaka to please, read the story for us. So I will put the story on the screen as well so that we can read it. So Ken and Vishaka, are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. So let me put the story, share the story so that
and use my Kindle. It's right there. It's open, ready to go.
Yes.
So
So
you,
this is the story, right?
okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Shall I begin reading?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. This is a Matanga Jataka. We call it Chandala Champion.
Hmm.
It was while staying at Jetavana that the Buddha told this story about King Udena. In a previous existence, Venerable Pindola had been a king in Kosambi and had been very fond of the royal park there. Remembering this, during the hot season, he often used his supernatural power to travel through the air from Jetavana to spend the hottest part of the day in the cool shade of that park. One day, while Venerable Pindola was sitting under a magnificent sal tree in full flower and enjoying the bliss of his arahatship, King Udena entered the garden with his retinue. Since the king had been drinking steadily for the past week, he lay down in the arms of one of his women on the great royal stone and immediately fell asleep. When the women who were singing, playing instruments, and dancing realized that the king was asleep, they stopped and wandered around the garden. As they were picking fruit and gathering flowers, they came upon Venerable Pindola. They paid their respects and sat down to listen to his teaching. The woman who was holding the king shifted her weight slightly, and the king awoke. Not seeing the musicians, he cried, "Where have all those good-for-nothing women gone without my permission?" "They are over there, sire," the woman said, pointing. "They have gathered around an ascetic and are listening to his teaching." Enraged, the king stormed across the garden and confronted Venerable Pindola. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted at the bhikkhu. "What right have you to sit here with the women of my court? I'll teach you." He ordered that an entire basket of biting red ants be dumped on Venerable Pindola's body. Venerable Pindola, however, immediately rose into the air and admonished the king not to get angry and not to be so hasty. Then he returned to Jatavana and alighted at the entrance to the Buddha's preferred chamber. "Where have you come from?" asked the Tathagata. Venerable Pindola told him what had happened, and the Buddha replied, "Pindola, this is not the first time that King Udena has tried to harm a religious man. Long ago, too, he did the same thing." At Venerable Pindola's request, the Buddha told this story of the past. Shall I continue, or would someone else like to read?
I think you can continue.
Okay.
If somebody volunteers,
Long, long ago, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Varanasi, the Bodhisattva was born outside the city as the son of a Chandala. Can you make it a little bigger?
yes, yes, yes.
Use my
Yes, yes, sorry.
Okay, that's good. And was named Matanga. One day, as he was entering the city, the palanquin of Dita Mangalika, the daughter of a rich Varanasi merchant, passed by. This young woman was on her way to the park, where she went every month with her friends. Matanga stopped and stepped aside to get out of the way of the palanquin and the entourage. At that moment, however, Dita Mangalika happened to peer out from behind her curtain. She saw Matanga standing against the wall and asked one of her servants who he was. When she learned that he was a Chandala, she became upset. "Curses!" she cried. "The mere sight of an outcast brings bad luck for the whole day. Our party is ruined." She quickly rinsed her eyes with perfumed water to remove the ritual pollution and returned home. Her friends were furious and turned on Matanga. "You vile outcast!" they shouted at the man and beat him. "You have cheated us out of free food and liquor today." They pelted him with stones and left him lying senseless on the ground. When he regained consciousness, he thought, I was just an innocent bystander, but Dita Mangalika's friends beat me for no reason whatsoever. For that, I will marry her. I will not give up until she is given to me. Okay?
Okay.
He found her. I need the next line.
Yeah.
He found her father's house.
I don't see it. He found her father's house. I don't see it.
Here.
Wait. Can you read now?
Oh, there we go. He
Father
found her father's house. He
house
found her father's house and lay down
in front of the door.
in front of the door, refusing to move. When anyone asked why he was lying there, he simply replied, All I want is Dita Mangalika. Matanga lay there without moving, refusing to take any food. One day passed, then a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. On the seventh day, Dita Mangalika's family, afraid of being disgraced by having a Chandala die on their doorstep, relented and gave Dita Mangalika to him as his wife. Stand up, husband, Dita Mangalika said quietly to him. Let us go to your house. Madam, Dita Matanga replied, I was severely beaten by your friends. I am weak from hunger and cannot walk. You must pick me up and carry me on your back. Dita Mangalika obediently lifted her husband and, in full sight of all the neighbors, carried him through the city gate to the Chandala village. Matanga kept Dita Mangalika in his house for a few days without violating any caste rules. Now that she has given up the pride of her birth, I wish to show her the highest honor and to give her the best gift, he declared. The only way that I can do this is by renouncing the world. He summoned her and said, Madam, unless I go to the forest to gather food, we will not be able to stay alive. Please wait patiently until I return. You must not worry. After instructing the members of his household to take care of Dita Mangalika, Matanga went into the forest and undertook the life of an ascetic. He practiced concentration meditation with such great energy and determination that in only 7 days he had perfected the 5 extraordinary powers and the 8 jhanas. Now, he declared, I will be able to protect Dita Mangalika properly. Using his newly acquired supernatural power, he returned to Varanasi. He alighted at the gate of the Chandala village and walked to Dita Mangalika's house. As soon as she saw him, she began to weep. Husband, she cried, why did you desert me and become an ascetic? Never mind, madam, he replied. I intend to make you more glorious than before. In front of many people, will you be able to say one simple sentence? I think so, husband. What do you want me to say? When anyone asks you about me, you must reply, my husband is not Matanga. My husband is the great Mahabrahma himself. Can you do that? Yes, sir, I can. Excellent. When they ask you where your husband has gone, you must reply, he has gone to the Brahma heavens. If they ask when he will come back, you must say, in 7 days he will come, breaking through the dark of the full moon, or breaking through the disk of the full moon. Can you do that? Yes, sir, I can, she replied. And Matanga went to the Himawat. Okay. Shall I continue or someone else?
Let me ask. Anybody would like to volunteer? if not, I think just let me briefly gloss over some of the things here, because I think that would be a little, useful for the audience today. Because you see yes, yes. Before we read further, I will just gloss over some of the terms here, like the Matanga is of course a very, it's a caste. Even today, it falls under what is called the outcast. And Matanga, Anga is of course organ of the body, and Mata means powerful. So Matanga means arm strong. Somebody whose arms are strong. And this there is a reversal of a story here. Matanga from the beginning, he reverses all the Brahminical sort of the notions, and he says that he is a Brahma himself, and not only ordinary Brahma, is a Mahabrahma. There is a story in the Brahminical Puranas and the Vedas that the Brahmins are born out of the mouth of the Brahma. In the Buddhist cosmological world, there are many Brahmas, there are many Brahmaloks. There is not just one. They are all temporary. They arise and pass away. So, this is a very interesting reversing of a thing that, and Ditta Mangalika is, of course, a very beautiful name, which means that, she sees the auspicious. But, she, in the beginning of the story, she sees, according to the Brahminical notion, something inauspicious. And, she pours water in her eyes to purify, her sight. See, this is the concepts of the pollution and purity, which started emerging in India after, in 300 AD. So you see, this is a very interesting sort of story where you see the dialectics between the Brahminical values and Buddhist values. And of course, Matanga goes to the forest, and he, of course, attends to the 8 Sammapatis and the 5 powers of dhyana. They are very, very beautifully told. So this is a very interesting way to look at the dialectics between Brahmanism and Buddhism. So anybody would like to volunteer, or should we request Kane to continue, because I think it's a long read. Okay, I will read some of the parts, one page or two, but you can continue. Kane, Vishaka, please.
Okay. Ditamangalika went about her daily life in Varanasi, and whenever anyone asked, she loudly proclaimed, "My husband is not Matanga. My husband is the great Mahabrahma himself." People believed her, and soon the story had spread throughout the city. In every quarter, people were telling each other, "Her husband is not staying with her because he is Mahabrahma. Next week, at the full moon, he will return in all his glory." On the 7th night, when the full moon was high in the sky, Matanga assumed the appearance of Mahabrahma, and with a great blaze of light, which illuminated not only the city of Varanasi, but also the entire kingdom of Caste, he broke through the moon. After circling the city 3 times, he began his descent. The multitude of worshippers shouted their adoration and offered garlands and incense as they followed him to the Chandala village. The devotees of Brahma reverently draped Ditamangalika's house with white cloths. In front of the house, they spread the ground with 4 kinds of perfume and erected a pavilion with a splendid throne in the center. At the door of the pavilion, they laid a layer of white sand as smooth as a mirror, scattered flowers, stretched awnings, and hung banners. They lit incense and the lamp with scented oil, and invited Matanga to sit on the throne. When Ditamangalika entered, Matanga understood that she was menstruating. He touched her navel with his thumb, and she immediately conceived. "Madam," he announced, "you are pregnant and will have a son." Next page. "Both you and..."
"He will receive great honor and highest tribute. The water that washes your feet will be used for the ceremonial." Now, can you read? "Sprinkling of kings throughout all of Jambudvipa. The water in which you bathe will become a magic elixir. Those who..." Now you can read. I think now it appears on the screen. "Sprinkle it on their heads."
"One who prostrates himself at your feet should offer 1,000 coins. One who kneels in respect should offer you 100 coins. One who remains standing to greet you should offer you 1 coin. Madam, be vigilant. Then he stepped out of the pavilion. As the great crowd watched, he rose into the air and appeared to re-enter the moon. The great crowd remained standing outside the pavilion all night. The next morning, they placed Ditamangalika in a golden palanquin and crying loudly, "The wife of Mahabrahma! Make way for the wife of Mahabrahma!" They carried her into the city. As they made a procession around the whole city of Varanasi, 12 leagues in extent, many worshipped her and offered coins according to Matanga's instructions. That day, she received 18 crores of coins. In the city center, the people erected a great pavilion and decorated it with rich curtains. They invited Ditamangalika to stay there during her confinement, provided her with every comfort, and paid her great respect. After 10 months, she gave birth to a son, whom the Brahmins named Mandavya, because he was born in the pavilion. In front of the pavilion, the devotees had begun building a 7-story palace with 7 magnificent entrance gates. All of the workers and the donors gained a great deal of merit in the construction, and the palace was completed about the time the prince was born. Mother and son moved into the palace, and Mandavya grew up there, amid great splendor. When he was 7 years old, renowned teachers came and taught him the 3 Vedas. By the time he was 16, he was feeding 16,000 Brahmins every day in the alms hall in the 4th gateway. One day, which happened to be a festival day, Mandavya, brilliantly dressed with golden slippers on his feet and a gold staff in his hand, was at the gateway giving directions to the servants who were serving special rice porridge with fresh ghee, honey, and jaggery to the 16,000 Brahmins. At that time, Matanga was meditating in his hermitage in the Himavat. He directed his thoughts to Varanasi and saw what was happening. Ditamangalika's son is going in the wrong direction, he thought. I must teach him how to give so that the gift will bring great fruit. Passed through the air to Lake Anotata, rinsed out his mouth, and assumed the guise of a poor wandering ascetic, with a ragged robe and an earthen bowl. Passing again through the air, he alighted at the alms hall right in front of Mandavya. Where are you from? The youth shouted. Who are you? You wretched outcast. You look more like a yaka than an ascetic. How dare you show up here in your vile, filthy rags, picked up from the garbage? You're not worthy to receive alms here. This delicious food, sir, Matanga replied gently, is beautifully arranged and is being graciously offered. There is plenty here, and we take only what we need to live. Why not let a low-caste man enjoy a bit as well? This food is prepared exclusively for Brahmins, Mandavya retorted sharply, given from my pious heart that I may reap the blessing. It's not for the likes of you. Get out of here, you brute. Matanga calmly replied, sow seed on high ground and on low, in good faith, and you will find those worthy to receive your gifts. Don't talk to me about worthy recipients, Mandavya haughtily snarled. I know where to sow my seeds of faith. For me, the noble Brahmins, high-born and lofty, those who know the sacred scriptures, are a fertile field of merit. Matanga answered him, pride of birth, arrogance, drunkenness, greed, hatred, and ignorance. Those who harbor those wicked vices are a barren and infertile field for seeds of faith. There is those in whom pride of birth, arrogance, drunkenness, greed, hatred, and ignorance find no place. They are a fertile field of merit. This miserable beggar talks too much, Mandavya shouted angrily. Where are my servants? Gandakuchi, Upajaya, and Upajoja, he called. Come here. The three servants came running and asked, What is it, master? Who is this damned outcast? Mandavya asked. Have you ever seen him before? No, sir, they replied. He must be a juggler, a gambler, or some other troublemaker.
How did he get in?
Well, don't just stand there. Do something. What shall we do, master? Seize the miserable outcast. Beat him. Wrap him up with his... Whip him until his back is raw. Torture him. Break his jaw. Kill him if you like it. Just get rid of him. Before the men could touch him, Matanga rose and stood poised in the air above their heads. Reviling a sage, that champion of faith and right proclaimed, is like swallowing a blazing ball of fire, biting hard iron, or leveling a mountain with your fingernails. While all the Brahmins were gazing at him, Matanga turned to the east and flew away. Matanga, making a determination that his footprints should be visible, he came down in the street near the eastern gate and begged for alms. Then he went to sit in a nearby hall to eat his meager fare. All the Devas of the city were outraged that Mandavya had dared to speak so rudely to the great sage. The chief of the Devas grabbed Mandavya and twisted his neck so sharply that his head faced backwards. He must be punished for his wickedness, the Devas declared, out of respect for Matanga. He did not, the Devas declared, but out of respect for Matanga, he did not kill the boy. Nevertheless, the youth's body was stiff, and his eyes rolled back in his head. Other Devas grabbed the 16,000 Brahmins and twisted their necks as well. They all appeared dead as they lay on the pavement, with spittle dribbling from their mouths. People informed Ditamangalika that something had happened to her son, and she hurried to the alms hall. When she saw Mandavya, she was sure that he was dead and cried, What has happened here? Who has done this to my son? Several bystanders tried to explain what had happened, but no one really knew. There was an ascetic here, said one. His robes were very dirty, like something picked up from the garbage, said another. He said something to your son, said a third. He must have done this, added another. No one else has the power to do such a thing, Mangalika thought. It must have been the wise Matanga. He is steadfast and full of goodwill to all creatures. However, he would never make all these people suffer like this. I wonder what he did and where he has gone. Aloud, she asked, What direction did the ascetic go? In order to bring, he rose into the air and went toward the eastern gate, several young men told her. Ditamangalika took a solid gold pitcher and bowl and went with a company of maidservants to look for her husband. Near the eastern gate, she saw his footprints and followed them to the hall where he was sitting and eating his food. Ditamangalika walked through the hall, paid her respects to Matanga, and stood in front of him. As soon as he saw her, he dropped the last bit of rice back into his earthen bowl. Ditamangalika poured water for him from the gold pitcher, and he washed his hands and rinsed out his mouth. I found my son stretched out on the floor, she said, with his head twisted backwards and his eyes rolled back in his head. I'm afraid that he is dead. Who did such a cruel thing? There are powerful devas all around who respect wise ascetics. Offended by your son's wicked and violent abuse, they must have decided to punish him. Dewa with me, my brother, I love my son. I beg for your help and your protection. I neither have nor ever had, nor have I ever had thoughts of cruelty, he told her. Your son has been badly educated.
He is drunk with ignorant pride of birth and knows nothing of the true meaning of the scriptures. Yes, brother, she replied, please forgive me and for not teaching my son humility and tolerance. Though the wise are never fierce in rage, I know that he is prone to flashes of anger. Now you can continue. Anybody would like to volunteer to read?
Matanga was pacified by Dialectics.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I am ready.
Yes.
Okay, Mahendraji, can you read from where sir has left?
Yes.
Okay, Matanga was pacified.
Huh. Matanga was pacified by the Thamanglika's apology. Let me give you an elixir, he offered compassionately, which will restore your foolish son to you. She held out the gold bowl and he dropped into it the leftovers from his earthen bowl. Place some of this rice in your son's mouth, he instructed her, and he will be released by the devas and will return to normal. Mix the rest with water and put it in the mouth of the afflicted Brahmins, and they will also be restored. Then he arose and departed from the Himavat. Dithamanglika placed the golden bowl on her head and returned to the palace, announcing as she walked, I have the elixir of life. I have the elixir of life. When she reached the alms hall, she knelt and put half of the rice in her son's mouth. Immediately, the devas fled, and Mandavya straightened his neck and got up. Brushing the dust from his robes, he asked, Mother, what happened? You know well enough that you have done wrong. She replied, Look at the miserable plight of the Brahmins you feed. As Mandava looked around, he was horrified and filled with remorse. Mandava, my dear son, Dithamangalika admonished him, You have been a fool. You must learn how to give so that your gift will bear fruit. Ignorant, greedy, hating, and conceited men like these are not fit for your generosity. Only those like the wise Matanga are truly worthy. Gifts given to the wicked bear little fruit, but from offerings given to calm and holy men, the reward is great. From now on, be generous to virtuous ascetics who, through their meditation, have perfected the 8 jhanas. Offer your gifts to Pekka, Buddhas, and to wise sages. Now, my son, let me give these servants the elixir and make them whole once again. She poured water into the bowl, mixed it with the leftover rice, and placed a few drops in the mouth of each of the 16,000 Brahmins. All of them got up and brushed the dust from their robes. Having been fed the livings of a Chandala, they regarded themselves as defiled. Knowing that they would be declared outcasts by other Brahmins, they left Varanasi in disgrace and went to the kingdom of Mejha. At that time in Mejha, there was a Brahmin ascetic named Jati Manta living on the bank of the Vetavaf river. Jati Manta was obsessively proud of his Brahmin birth. In order to humble him, Matanga built a hermitage upstream from him and practiced his meditation there. One day, Matanga intentionally dropped a tooth, a toothstick he had used into the water. The toothstick floated downstream and got entangled in Jatimanta's matted hair while he was performing his ablutions. Curse the brute who tossed this into the water. He fumed. I will take care of whoever did it. Just let me lay my hands on him. He walked upstream along the bank and found Matanga. Did you throw a toothstick into the river? Jatimanta asked Matanga. Yes, I did. Matanga replied calmly. What is your caste? I am a Chandala. You wild outcast? Jatimanta shouted. Damn you, you filthy brute. I forbid you to stay here another minute. Go downstream where you belong. Oh, I missed
sorry.
what happened.
Sorry. Yeah.
Ah. Damn you filthy brute, I forbid you to stay here another minute. Go downstream where you belong. Make sure this never happens again. Matanga calmly picked up his bowl and complied with the Brahmin's demand. Even after setting up his residence downstream, however, all the toothsticks he threw into the river floated against the current and got entangled in Jatimanta's hair. Jatimanta again stormed into Matanga's hermitage. Curse you, he shouted. If you stay here in 7 days, your head will split into 7 pieces. Matanga did not reply. If I allow myself to feel any anger towards this man, he thought, I will be violating my
virtue. Nevertheless, I must find a way to break his pride. On the 7th day, Matanga used his supernatural power to prevent the sunrise throughout the Jambudvipa. People, now you can read.
Were inconvenienced by the lack of sun. Many devotees flocked to Jatimanta's hermitage and asked, Is it you, sir, who is preventing the sun from rising today? No, Jatimata answered. I have nothing to do with it, but there is a Chandala ascetic living downstream. I am sure this is his doing. The people proceeded downstream and asked Matanga whether he was responsible for the sun's failure to rise. Yes, friends, Matanga replied. I have stopped the sun. Why did you do so? Why did you do it? They asked. That Brahmin's ascetic, who is your favorite, has reviled me. Although I am completely innocent, he despises me simply because of my caste. Only when he falls at my feet and begs forgiveness will I release the sun. They hurriedly back upstream and dragged Jatimanta very much against his will to Matanga's hermitage and threw him down at Matanga's feet. Now, sir, they pleaded, please release the sun. My friends, Matanga replied, if I release the sun immediately, this wretched man's head would split into 7 pieces. Well, sir, they asked, what are we to do? Bring me a lump of clay, Matanga told them. After they had brought it, he said, now put the lump of clay on this ascetic's head, carry him to the river, and lower him into the water. The people did exactly as Matanga had instructed. As they lowered Jatimanta into the water, the sun rose. The lump of clay split into 7 pieces, and the ascetic, completely humbled, sank in the water. Now, where are those 16,000 Brahmins who believed themselves defiled by eating my leftovers. Matanga wondered, let me humble them too. He immediately perceived they were staying with the king of Meja. Using his supernatural power, he transported himself to the capital and began walking for alms in the neighborhood where the Brahmins were staying. The Brahmins saw him and became worried. If he stays here, they said to each other, we will soon find ourselves without any support. Hoping to drive him away, they hurried to the king. Sir, they complained, a charlatan has just arrived in your capital. He is no more than a juggler, but he is posing as an ascetic and is begging in the streets. You must arrest him. Of course, replied the king. And he sent his men to seize Matanga. They found him sitting on the bench beside a well, quick, quietly eating from his earthen bowl. One of the soldiers drew his sword and cut off the wise ascetic's head. The Devas instantly rose up and poured down a torrent of hot ashes, completely destroying Mesa and all its inhabitants. Thus, it is said, because of the death of the glorious Matanga, the entire kingdom of Mesa was swept away by the Devas. Matanga was reborn in the Brahma heavens. Having concluded his story, the Buddha said, thus, this is not the first time that King Udena has abused a religious man. Then the Buddha identified the birth. At that time, King Udena was Mandavya and I was the wise Matanga.
Thank you so much, Kane, uh, and Mahendra sir. A very interesting reading. I think there is so much to talk about this, particularly the names. And the names like Jati Mantra means somebody born out of mantra is another name for the Brahminical class. So there are a lot of elements here in the story as to how Matanga inverts or sabotages the Brahminical sort of the ideas. And I think this is a very interesting reading that we have seen today. So anyone has anything to offer, any reflections on this Jataka? So why I choose to read this Jataka? Because reading slowly is itself is a big advantage. And reading it in the group is a very interesting practice. And the reason I chose this story because whenever we think about the Jataka, because of the various realms that are there from the lowest hell like Avicii to the highest Brahma world and in between animal world, human world and all. A lot of people who think rationally they are put off. But as some of the scholars have been saying that these are the psychological spaces that we all inhibit. Sometimes we are in the worst hellish state of mind. Sometimes our minds are sublime. There might not be social or partial existence of these realms. We don't know that there are so many Brahma worlds existing, but let's assume this ancient cosmology, where there are different world systems and in the universe. And this particular story of Matanga, as I said, Anga is of course the organ and like arm, and Mata is strong. It's also a name for the elephant, and Matanga is a caste, and it's associated mostly with the untouchables. Even today there is a caste in Maharashtra which is scheduled caste or untouchable, is called the Matanga. There are historical figures in the history like Kashyapa Matanga, who was the first person from the Indian subcontinent to take Buddhism to China. And there are like this very interesting sort of the subversion of the Brahminical values. The eating the food of the Chandala is considered to be polluting in the Brahminical Dharma Shastras. But here is Matanga who is feeding 16,000 Brahmins the juta or Ushta. The word is Ushta in Pali and in the Indian languages. And very interesting the way he challenges the pride of the Jati Manta Brahman. That he considers himself very superior to other people. So there are many elements, as I said, in the story, and we can read a lot, like dialectics between the Buddhist values and the Brahminical values in the story. And as Cain and Vishaka, as titled, is very rightly as the Chandala champion. There are some people who are saying that this might be the first literary revolution against the Brahminical, ethos in a narrative form. But we know that Buddhism, there are a lot of sutras like, Kuttadanta Sutta, Ambatta Sutta, Assalayan Sutta, which talks about that, people cannot be superior based on their birth. And there is a theme, motif, that which often goes on like Jaccha Kammanoti, na Jaccha Oti Brahmano, Kammuna Vassaloti, Kammuna Oti Brahmano. Only by your act one can be anything, Your birth doesn't determine that you are superior. So, this is a very beautiful story. And there are stories like that in Jataka, which, as a narrative sort of a treasure that we need to go back again and again and read and find out the different layers in the Indian history, which talks about, the pride of the people and, the anti-Brahmanism within the stories. So this is just to summarize. So if there is no comment by anyone, we can end the class today. But, if anybody has to remark or comment, they are welcome at this stage. We'll spend another 4 or 5 minutes before we conclude.
Visaka has a question.
Yes, Vishaka.
I'm wondering what's happening with the Mahabodhi temple.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I think.
Sorry. Yeah, I've been trying to follow on Facebook and so forth, and I'm not getting anyway. I'm concerned.
Yeah,
And
I think the main monk who was leading, Vinayacharya, I think he's in the jail. I don't know on what charges he's put in the jail. And,
okay.
this agitation was supported from all over India. People agitated everywhere. Like in Nagpur, there were 2 big marches where 50,000 people joined. Same in other parts of this Maharashtra and similarly in UP. So people,
Maybe you can fill me in just kind of in Messenger or something like that, or send me somewhere to get the proper news. I would appreciate it very much.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to suggest another Jataka for next time. I don't remember what number it is. What is it from high seat, low seat?
And our title is High Seat, Low Seat.
Our title is high seat, low seat.
Let's read it.
Where
Yeah.
the Chandala wants to get a mango, a ripe mango.
Yeah.
For his wife. She's pregnant and she has a craving.
Hmm.
And so the only place to get a ripe mango is the king's garden. So he sneaks in and climbs the mango tree and finds a ripe fruit, but then it's getting light and he's afraid he'll be arrested. So he climbs higher and then he finds the king. Later, the king and his Brahmin teachers come and teach him the Dhamma.
It's the Chawaka Jataka.
What is it?
Chawaka Jataka.
Chawaka Jataka. Yeah, and I love the resolution of it.
Let's read it in the next class. I think that's a great, interesting idea, Vishaka.
Yeah, I really like that because there's a proper resolution and a recognition. And I really love that the king is wise enough to resolve the issue. Because he made a mistake. He was stealing that that mango, and he realized he was a fool. But he advises the king anyway, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. The king accepts advice, which is so hard for all of us to do. Yeah. So I if you wouldn't mind, soon I'd like to read that one.
Yes. In the next session, we will read that one. Thank you for offering to read.
Okay.
I think.
Wonderful.
So,
wonderful. I can't tell you how much we enjoy.
It's
Thank you.
beautiful reading, and our YouTubes are seen by many people, and a lot of people comment. Personally, I think it's doing very well. Thanks to all of you that we are being able to get a good number of people. So anyone before we conclude? If there is no comment, then we will end our class here and we will meet. Areshri. Areshri raised her hand. Areshri, please.
Hello, Jai.
Jai Bhim, Areshri.
I had a question ki, who writes this Jatak Katha or how was this Jatak Katha formed?
Mhm.
And are these Jatak Kathas really real, like they happened?
See, these are all, if you follow the previous classes, we have gone into that as to how the Jatak Katha came into being. And I recommend you very strongly that please go through the previous sessions. But to answer it shortly, the initial gathas are found in Khudak Nikaya. There are more than 6,000 gathas. So based on one verse, there is Ek Nipat. Based on two verse, there is, two Nipat. And over the period, what is called the Atuvacharis in Sri Lanka or, Bhanakas in the Indian tradition, they, develop the stories around the Gathas. And we have seen how that has taken place, particularly in case of Segu Jataka that we have seen in the first class. So over the period of time, the Gathas were developed, added, the prose was added and the stories and the plots were developed, and the process went on, according to some scholars, for 1,000 years. And finally in Sri Lanka, what is called the Jatak Atthakatha, the 550 stories were, given the shape of the what is called the corpus of the Jatakas. And they said that they were collectively edited, re-edited, not as an individual story. So there is a very interesting history of Jataka, the evolution of the Jataka stories. And when you study the narrative literature, because it's educative in nature, you don't look at it from the factual point of view, whether they are real or unreal. The point is to, they might be real, they might not be real, but they have an educative power. They have the power, as remarked by Charles Halise, like the what is called the moral creativity. The morality is very difficult to teach or learn, as we all know. But through the engagement with this Jataka, which offers us many dimensions, many conclusions, so that we can see for ourselves as to what was the right thing to do at that particular point of time. I think we have to look at them as an educative material. And of course, everybody loves stories. We are all story-loving animals. The human beings are story-loving animals. And we live in a world that is story. We have stories about everything, like the origin of the world and like that. So I think the question about whether they are true or false, I think is a secondary question. The point is, when we engage with this narrative literature, as you will see in the previous sessions that we had, you will begin to know that how much power they have to educate the imaginations of the human beings, how much those educated imagination has a power to transform the world around us. So I think there's a brief comment. You can go through the previous classes, Arishri, and that was a wonderful question, I would say.
Yes, thank you so much. Last night I went through the two lectures
Good.
you sent me. So
Good,
thank
good,
you so much.
good, Arishi.
Yeah.
Good. Well done.
Sir, may
Yeah,
I add?
Umesh.
These are, we can think it of as a fantasy giving birth to the real wisdom. The
Yes.
only essence that we are getting from these jatkas are the wisdom and the way of life we have to live, and what the society structure and fabric is. All have some human values there, sir.
Yes, and to take the further thing, like the dialectics between Buddhism and Brahmanism, we know that Ramayana, Mahabharata, they are post Buddha development, and I think there is a continuous textual interaction between the Buddhist and the Brahminical literature. And some of the scholars says in a lot of Brahminical philosophical text, they are answering to the Buddhists. And likewise in the narrative sort of the literature like Jataka and all, and the Brahminical side of the thing, Mahabharata and Ramayana and the Puranas, they had the interaction and a lot of elements were shared. Like whatever we call Brahma or Indra, whatever, they didn't just belong to the Brahmins. The scholar says that they form the part of what is called the Indian sort of narrative milieu or narrative atmosphere. And the Jains, there are now beautiful comparative studies about these characters found in Jains and Brahminical Hinduism and Buddhism. And these are word that was shared by everybody, but the outlook is different, the aim is different. Like if you look at the Brahminical narrative stories, they all ultimately defend the supremacy of the Brahmins, be it Ramayana or Mahabharata or the Puranas. While the Buddhism, as we have seen in the Buddhist narrative or the Buddhist stories, as we have seen in this Matanga Jataka, they completely turns it upside down and talks about justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So you see, this we cannot just throw the Jatakas away as we have been doing, particularly in the Indian context, thinking that they are like true or false, imaginary or fantastical. The literature is literature. There are great novels. Like if you look at the Uncle Tom's Cabin, the novel which appeared in America, written by a very renowned scholar, writer. She has, brought out the suffering of the blacks. And Lincoln said that this novel, this short lady has brought a revolution in America through her novel, the Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's a novel that provoked the imagination of the people. It's an imaginary work, has got a tremendous impact, leading itself to the Civil War in America, one of the factors. Same with Madame Bovary. This novel has created space for the human rights, as to every human beings have a right. So you see, this is not the literature which has to be just pushed aside. I think engaging with it, understanding with it has a lot of potential for transformation.
I
And
think you're right.
you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
yes, Ken.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to say that um, having been brought up as Christian with one life and heaven and hell afterwards, the idea of samsara and seeing, I mean, the Buddha said he could look how many eons back, right? And remember, and the stories are told within the present time with people who are right there, including his followers and so forth. And then the story of the past, we can see the working of karma and the working of friendship all the way through. And I always am interested in the stories that have to do with Devadatta, because even at how many times he was the enemy of the Buddha, and in this last life, he tried even to kill the Buddha. But we know that at the very last, as he was on his way to ask forgiveness when he died, that in the future he will become, the Buddha says, a Pacceka Buddha. So that inevitably, if we learn from our past experience, growing more and more in wisdom and morality, we know that the outcome will be complete arhatship or something, and Pacceka Buddha something, so that there is hope even for someone who tried to kill the Buddha himself.
Yes. Great.
If we learn from the past, means the caves there that has been created at that time, and the paintings and all the creating all the figures on the walls. Jatka has given birth to so many performing and visual arts also, and it has carved on not only on the walls but on the hearts also.
Yes. There is, I must confess that when I first started, thinking about these classes, I thought that, we will read just a story and, think about it. But as I dive deeply into a lot of, books and literature, I found that, this is an entirely different world, which is indispensable for the Buddhist anywhere, and particularly for India now that the Buddhism is coming. We need a project of educating people, and where can we find a greater project than the Jataka itself? So I think, we can learn a lot from Jataka, and we have two remaining sessions where we are going to, look at the, more aspects of the Jataka tales. Next time we are going to read the Chavaka Jataka as, volunteered by Vishaka, and let's enjoy. Until then, goodbye, and see you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.